Hey everyone, so this is vlog post number one. So what does curriculum mean to me? Curriculum really means what we are teaching. Curriculum really means the content to me. What are we going to be teaching to the students? Are we going to be teaching note reading? Are we going to be teaching rhythm, style, dynamics? It really is the driving force in the content. Curriculum really does mean the content to me. It is an overview of the different skills and concepts and we're going to be teaching. It doesn't mean necessarily the specific how we're going to teach it. It just means what we're going to teach to me. Is there a right way to design curriculum? I think there are many different ways to design curriculum. I think that I wouldn't say there are necessarily right and wrong ways to design curriculum, but I think that we really need to think about how we're designing it and why we're designing it. For me, designing backwards using UBD and starting with the assessment backwards is the best way to design curriculum. I think that um, that's a factor you need to keep in mind when considering designing curriculum. Tying into the next question is what do you want your students to know in the end, and how are you going to get there? There's so many different ways to get to that end result, but what do you want them to know in the end? Do you want them to know how to perform specific rhythms? Do you want them to know how to perform dynamics or style or note reading? And how do you get there? The how you get there, I think, it obviously varies from teacher to teacher, state to state, even country to country, because I know I do teach internationally. But I think the what and what you want them to know at the end is the biggest thing you need to start with. If you know where you want the students to end up, then you can backtrack yourself and find out ways to get them there, because you're going to need to do it in different ways for different students. Not all students learn in the same way, and you need to design different ways to get there. Um, all music programs, we share the same aims and the goals, but we have to come up with different ways and different challenges to meet those students. Younger in the Elliott article, I talked about how younger students are actually, can learn and master more difficult approaches because they're at a younger age. And one of the things I talk about is how musicianship and educatorship are interdependent. Like, we as teachers have to be confident and employ, embody, exemplify excellent musicianship for these students. If we don't, then they don't have a good model to look after. Um, in New Jersey, they talked about how they're redesigning their music curriculum to have global perspective, 21st century learning, and real world applications. And I think that's really, really amazing, the way that they're taking an older model and updating it and learning it for nowadays, for the 21st century, and making it more accessible to students, and not this old antiquated way of sitting and learning by rote, and that's boring and uninteresting for them. Um, what factors to consider when designing curriculum? I think you need to consider a lot of things. Some of the things you need to, in my personal view, you need to consider are where are you teaching and the population of students are you teaching. That I think greatly affects how students learn. When I was teaching in Manchester, I had a high urban Hispanic population, and now I'm teaching in Kuwait, where I have a very high Arab affluent population. And that definitely, I take those into consideration when planning my lessons and my curriculum. We also need to think about, the effect of the curriculum is the schedule. What kind of schedule are you working with on a daily basis? Are you in block scheduling, or do you have, see them once a week for 40 minutes? You see them twice a week for 30 minutes. Also, how we group the learners and group the students together. Are students with special needs integrated into your music classes, or do you have separate classes for them? Use of space, I think, is are you in a classroom? Do you have your own classroom, or are you on a cart like a lot of teachers are? The physical and virtual space, I think, is very important to consider when designing curriculum. When you think about planning lessons in that curriculum, are you going to be designing a curriculum where you have big open spaces where you can have big ensembles, or are you going to be designing it where it has to be, a lot of it's going to be online on computer and computer based, which is okay, but that's something definitely to consider when you're taking it into consideration. Um, I also think that you need to consider the four stages of curriculum making, which are orientation, prep and planning, teaching and learning, and the evaluation process. It's definitely, you have to think about those and take those into consideration And orientation, I think, is one of the most important because it's developing your perspectives and your value on music and education as a teacher. What do you value to be the most important? Prepping and planning is, when you're going to prep and plan your lessons and see how you want to take, how you want to present the material. But getting your perspectives on the value of music and what you think is important is really one of the most important parts of it. What does it mean to understand music? I think it means that students can really demonstrate what you're asking them to do, especially in an ensemble setting or even in a general music classroom setting. If you understand music, you're able to demonstrate those skills, such as note reading, rhythm reading, performing on an instrument, whether it be a xylophone in general music class or a saxophone in a band class, or singing a specific part. But I think we also need to keep in mind about that it's not about being able to play or sing a small section of music at a certain period of time. It's an overall understanding through a longer extended period of time. Something I really read that was great about musicianship and specifically in understanding is that it's revealed at a crossroads. It says opportunity to make music in the context of an authentic musical situation that surrounds the student with musical peers, goals, standards that serve to guide student thinking. I think that really goes hand in hand with understanding and showing us that they understand something. It's that it's not just a certain snippet in a time period. It's a great broader experience where they can show us that they understand something. And how do we know understanding when we see it and hear it? I think it comes down to we know it if the students can demonstrate it to us. Music is it's a performance-based art form. If students can demonstrate that to us, then and we can hear it and hear them do it and see them do it. I think that's where it really comes down to understanding. Yes, there's going to be some traditional assessments in music where you ask them to write and do certain written assessments, but music is a performance-based assessment. You need to be able to see and hear students do it. And if you can see and hear them do it, then that's what allows us to know that they're understanding it. Evaluation assessment, I think, talked about how they're very different. Evaluation is really based on grading, but assessment allows us to give feedback and improve the musicianship of the students. And I think that we need to keep that in mind when we evaluate students and see if they understand it, as by taking that into account and doing an assessment versus an evaluation. Assessing for us is assessing if they understand what we're talking about, if they can play in a specific style, if they can play specific rhythms or dynamics, or play the correct pitches. I think that's what we need to keep in mind, is that we need to keep that in mind as we're evaluating and seeing if the students understand. And I know I'm going a little long, but the last thing I want to talk about is how I thought it was really important to talk about how musicianship and educatorship are interdependent. It talked about how, a teacher must embody and exemplify this, that for our students to understand, we have to show them the proper and correct musicianship. And we have to be able to demonstrate that to the students. If we can't demonstrate that to the students, then the students don't have a good reference or good model for that. Okay, so I think that's it. Thanks.